All right, let's dive into something pretty big.
Yeah.
That's been all over the news. Iran's axis of resistance.
Right.
We've got a ton of sources on this. And it seems like, well, it's not looking so good for this alliance they've been building, for decades now. We're talking Assad falling in Syria, Israel going after like Hamas, Hezbollah.
Oh, yeah.
And even like rumblings within Iran itself. It's a lot to get through, but luckily...
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
We've got an expert here to help us make sense of it all.
It is a complex situation, that's for sure. Lots of moving parts. But before we even get into like all the current stuff, it's helpful to understand just what this whole axis of resistance even is and like how it even got started.
Yeah, I mean, for someone like me who's just kind of catching up, a little background would be amazing.
Yeah.
What is this term and like who are the major players we're talking about here?
So imagine like this whole network of, alliances all kind of pushing back against like Western influence in the Middle East. That's basically what the axis of resistance is. Iran is like spearheading it. And it includes groups like Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and until recently, Assad's regime in Syria. They're united by like, they oppose Israel and they want to limit like U.S. power in the region.
So it's not just like shared enemies, but they kind of have a shared vision for like what they want the Middle East to look like.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm just thinking Iran plays a pretty big role in all this.
Absolutely. They see themselves as like the leaders of this whole movement, providing, the finances, the military, the logistics to their allies.
Right.
It's, a way for them to have power, outside their own borders and create what they call strategic depth.
Strategic depth. Now that sounds like it came straight out of some like military textbook. Can you break that down for me?
Okay, think of it like this. Like you're playing Risk.
Okay.
All your troops are in one place. You're like super vulnerable. But you spread out, you get bases in a bunch of places.
Yeah.
You create like a buffer zone. You're harder to take down, right? So that's basically Iran's game plan with the axis of resistance. Like a network of allies, to protect themselves.
Okay, yeah.
Deter attacks.
So they're not just fighting on their own turf, they're using these alliances to fight on someone else's turf.
Yeah.
But from the intel you've sent, it seems like this risk strategy, it's not working out so well for them anymore.
No, not really. Especially like with the recent stuff in Syria, Assad falling, it's been a big blow.
Syria. I'm kind of curious about them. It seems like their relationship with Iran goes like way back, right?
It does. So it was Hafez al-Assad, Bashar's father, right?
Yeah.
He was the very first Arab leader to actually recognize the Islamic government in Iran, back in 79.
Wow.
It was a strong start to their alliance.
So this wasn't just some like convenient short-term thing. There's a lot of history there.
Oh, yeah.
But it's interesting, like despite that, Assad still fell. So what does that tell us about like how strong this axis really was?
Yeah.
And what does it mean like going forward for Iran?
That is a great question. And I think what we're seeing is that the axis was like more fragile than it looked, relied a lot on like specific leaders like Assad. And when they go, the whole thing becomes shaky. And for Iran, it raises some big questions about their whole, approach.
So if losing Assad is like losing like a key territory in that risk game, what do? Like, do they try to like hold on to what they've got? Or do they need to like completely rethink their plan?
That's the question, isn't it? And then you have Israel's actions. They've been super aggressive, targeting, not just Hamas and Hezbollah, but key figures within them too.
Yeah, Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, being assassinated. That was huge.
Yeah.
I remember reading about that and thinking, wow, Israel is not messing around.
Exactly. It's not just like containment anymore. They're actively trying to dismantle this whole axis of resistance, piece by piece. And this puts Iran in a tight spot. They have to reevaluate everything.
It's like they're being squeezed from all sides.
Yeah.
Could this push them towards like even more drastic stuff, like going all in on their nuclear program?
It's possible. We know they've been working on it for years. This situation could make them even more determined. Maybe they see a nuke as like the ultimate defense, the only way to like guarantee their safety and stop more attacks.
So axis crumbling. Israel breathing down their necks, the nuclear question looming large. It sounds like Iran's at a crossroads. Haven't they been in similar spots before? What makes this different?
They have faced challenges before, yeah, but this time it's Kai-sting.
Right.
Everything at once. Pressure on multiple fronts. Their allies are weakening. Then you add Trump back in the White House. Tougher sanctions. You've got a recipe for, a very tense situation.
Okay, so the stakes are like super high, but before we jump into the like consequences and what Iran might do next. I want to make sure we have the whole picture. We've talked about Iran, Israel. What about everyone else in this, like, regional chess game? Like Saudi Arabia, UAE, how are they looking at this?
They're watching very closely. They've been wary of Iran's influence, and they see this as well, potentially an opening.
An opening to what? Like push back against Iran even more?
Maybe. They might see a chance to, like, form new alliances, strengthen ties with Israel. Try to, like, reshape the balance of power in the region.
To benefit them, of course.
So it's not just Iran's axis crumbling, but new alliances, new power dynamics popping up.
Yeah, and that's what makes it also interesting and, well, kind of unpredictable. So many moving pieces in the next few months. The decisions they make will have ripple effects everywhere.
It's like one of those chain reaction games.
Right.
You knock over one piece, everything starts falling. And in this case, the consequences could be huge and messy.
Definitely. And understanding that, all that complexity is crucial if we want to grasp what's happening in the Middle East right now. And it's not just about, like, the geopolitics of it all, power plays. It's like people's lives, right?
Yeah, no, for sure.
People living in these countries caught in this, they're the ones who really pay the price. That's such a good point. It's easy to get caught up in the strategy and the big picture stuff, but we're talking about, like, families having to leave their homes, communities torn apart, economies wrecked.
Yeah, think about, like, the crisis in Gaza, the war in Yemen, the Syrian refugees. It's all connected.
It really drives home that this isn't just like some abstract, geopolitical thing. It's real events, real consequences.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder, and it makes finding peaceful solutions even more important. Trying to, calm things down before it gets worse.
Well, on the topic of solutions, there's been a lot of talk about a new deal of the century, like what Trump tried back in 2020. But with all the tension, the mistrust between Iran and the U.S., the sheer messiness of it all, is a deal even possible? I'm skeptical.
I get it. It's way different now than just a few years ago. Iran's winter, facing criticism, pressure. They're not going to accept something that looks like they're giving up, especially with the story they've been pushing about. The axis being so strong.
So they're stuck. They need sanctions gone. They need a way out of this corner they've painted themselves into.
Yeah.
But they got to look strong, not like they're caving.
Yeah. And then on the U.S. side, you've got Trump back, known for being tough on Iran. He's not going to give an inch if it looks like weakness.
It sounds like a recipe for, like, just total deadlock.
Right.
But if a big deal like that is off the table, what are the other options? What could Iran actually do to, like, improve their situation? And what would the U.S. have to do to, like, meet them halfway?
It's the big question. And the answers are simple. For Iran, it might mean changing up their whole regional strategy, moving away from, Hamas, Hezbollah, and trying to connect with other players in the region.
So instead of clinging to what's left of their risk board, they got to play a different game altogether.
Exactly. They could try, like, strengthening ties with Iraq, Oman, Qatar, countries that have been, more balanced with both Iran and the West.
It's a huge shift. But would those countries even, like, want to get closer to Iran, knowing the risks?
It's a gamble. But they've got their own interests, right? They might see this as a chance to, like, use Iran's weakness to their advantage. Maybe mediate between them and the U.S., facilitate dialogue, or even make economic deals that benefit everyone.
So there's room for, like, some clever diplomacy deal-making. But what about the U.S.? What would they need to do to make de-escalation more likely?
Well, step one would be, easing up on the sanctions. They've wrecked Iran's economy and fueled this resentment towards the West.
But isn't that, like, a hard sell politically, especially with Trump back? Wouldn't lifting sanctions just look like weakness, rewarding bad behavior?
It's a tough decision, no doubt, politically and strategically. But if the goal is to, like, stop Iran from getting nukes and calm things down, then some sanctions relief might be necessary to get them talking again.
It's a chicken and egg situation.
Yeah.
Iran needs sanctions lifted to rebuild, to show their people diplomacy works. But the U.S. wants to see concessions from Iran first, before they ease up.
It's a stalemate. It's been going on for years. And to break out of it, both sides have to take risks, be flexible, be willing to, like, compromise.
And that brings us back to, like,
yes,
what we asked earlier.
Yeah.
If you were advising Iran right now, what would you tell them to do?
It's a tough one, but I'd say two things. First, de-escalate with the U.S., even if it means, like, giving a little. They need to show they're serious about negotiating, maybe by agreeing to, like, limits on their nuclear program, in exchange for those sanctions being lifted.
So kind of like peace offering to get things moving.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, they need to start finding new allies. They can't just rely on the Axis anymore. They need to connect with other countries in the region, even those who've been closer to the U.S. It's playing the long game,
Yeah.
Building trust, showing they're a partner, not a threat.
It's a balancing act.
Right.
Trying to fix things with the U.S. while also extending their influence elsewhere. How do they even do both at the same time?
It's all about, the message, how you frame it. Iran has to present themselves as, a responsible player committed to peace and stability. They need to highlight, shared interests with the U.S., fighting terrorism, economic development.
So a bit of a PR makeover.
Yeah.
To soften their image and appeal to a wider audience.
Right. It's about changing the story, moving away from the, aggressive talk of the past and trying something more, conciliatory.
But can they do that while still backing Hamas and Hezbollah? Those alliances seem really core to their whole ideology and strategy in the region.
That's the tough part. They might need to change how they support those groups, maybe focus more on humanitarian aid, political engagement, rather than, direct military stuff. It's a tricky dance, but one they might have to learn if they want to survive in this new, geopolitical landscape.
Okay, so we've looked at ways to de-escalate the challenges for both Iran and the U.S., the need for, creative diplomacy and compromise. But what about the wild card, Israel? They seem set on dismantling the Axis no matter what. How does their aggressive approach fit into all this?
Israel's a major player, and their actions have a huge impact. They've made it clear, no Iran in Syria, no support for Hezbollah, no nukes.
And they're not afraid to use force to get what they want.
Exactly. And that creates a real dilemma for Iran. How do they respond to that without, escalating things, risking a bigger conflict?
They're walking a tightrope.
Yeah.
They can't look weak, back down from Israel.
Yeah.
But they also can't risk a major war.
It's a precarious. Needs careful thinking and restraint.
So all these competing interests, these high stakes, the potential for things to, completely spiral out of control, it's hard to see how we get to, peace and stability. It feels like everyone's playing a really dangerous game, and the consequences could be awful.
It's definitely complex, challenging. But I think it's important to remember, even in the toughest times, there's always hope for dialogue, for diplomacy, for finding, common ground.
I like that perspective. It's easy to get caught up in the doom and gloom, but even small steps towards, understanding cooperation, they can make a difference.
Exactly. And it's on us, as informed people, to engage with these tough issues, to question our own assumptions, and push for solutions that, put peace and human dignity first.
Yeah, it reminds us that we can't just, sit back and watch this all happen. These events, they have ripple effects. They reach way beyond the Middle East, right? Affecting global security, energy, even our lives here.
Yeah. And getting all this, understanding these dynamics is key to being, informed citizens, having real conversations about foreign policy.
All right, so we've covered a T-hone in this deep dive. Iran's axis of resistance, where it came from, the problems they're having, potential new alliances, the whole nuclear thing, other players in the region, the human cost, chances of things calming down. It's a lot. What about you, though, listening? What are you taking away from all this?
I think one of the, biggest things is that the Middle East is changing, big time. Old alliances, old power structures are shifting. We might be seeing a whole new Middle East taking shape.
And it feels like Iran is right at the center of all of this change.
Yeah.
They're being forced to, rethink everything.
Yeah.
Make some tough calls about where they go from here.
Exactly. They can't just, stick to that old axis of resistance plan. They got to adapt, build new connections, find ways to, get what they want without making everyone else mad.
That sounds pretty daunting. With all the mistrust with the West, the tension with Israel.
It's definitely not easy. It'll take compromise, commitment to talking, realizing that the old, winner-takes-all approach just doesn't work anymore.
And maybe a bit of that PR makeover we talked about. They got to convince everyone that they're a reliable partner, not some rogue state trying to take over.
Perception is everything. Yeah. They need to work on their image, highlight the good stuff they're doing, and show they want peace and stability.
Okay. So as we wrap up, let's put you in charge. Imagine you're advising Iran's leadership.
Yeah.
They need your help, fresh ideas on how to handle all this. What do you tell them to do?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'd say focus on talking, engaging, even with, those they see as enemies. Open up communication, build those relationships, find common ground.
To reach out to the U.S., even with all the, bad blood between them.
It might seem, I don't know, a little crazy, but sometimes the best way to deal with an enemy is to really understand them. Talk, find out what they're worried about. See where you can cooperate. It's not about giving in. It's about finding a way to, live together peacefully.
Yeah.
And go after things you both want.
What about Israel, though? They seem a lot harder to convince with their stance on the nuclear program and everything else Iran's doing in the region.
It's complicated, yeah. Lots of history, lots of suspicion. But even then, there's always room for, good, clever diplomacy, maybe, back channels, confidence-building stuff, a third party to help them talk.
It sounds, like a long shot.
Right.
But hey.
Yeah.
You never know. Stranger things have happened.
Right. Sometimes the most, unexpected things lead to the best outcomes.
So on that note of, cautious optimism.
Yeah.
I think we've reached the end of our deep dive here. We've looked at how complex the Iran situation is, the challenges, the potential ways forward, but the future, it's uncertain. And what Iran does next, those decisions, have big consequences.
He reminds us that, everything's connected. What happens in one place, it can affect us all.
And it's up to us, to stay informed, question what we think we know, and push for solutions that, bring peace, stability, and make sure everyone is treated with dignity.
Because in a world like ours, so complex, so interconnected, understanding is the first step to making things better.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another one. Until then, keep asking those questions, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the stuff that shapes our world.